Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Chats with Chels podcast. I'm your host, Chelsea Miller, and today's podcast is going to be a little bit about week 4. And if you missed my first podcast, I talked about weeks 1 through 3. So if you haven't listened to my first podcast, click back in the playlist and listen to it because you'll get some context that you might not have now listening to week 4. I did want to start by saying that I'm feeling better this week. I think each week that goes by, I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable and a little less chaotic in my brain. So with that, let's jump in. Also, I'm recording this on a Wednesday, which is midway through the week, but I'm feeling inspired to film this today. And I have a lot of assignments coming up throughout the weekend that I need to focus on. So you get a midweek check-in, I guess. So sit back, grab your coffee or whatever beverage, and let's jump right in. This weekend, I tried to read 2 papers that I needed to present on this past week, and that didn't happen. I did have a stats homework assignment that I had to finish, and it was 13 questions. And the weird thing about this stats class is we don't really get a breakdown of the code or the ins and outs of how to use the code. My professor just kind of tells us like, oh, and you can use this code in R. And that doesn't really help when you don't know how to use R. I'm not really sure if this class was tailored to people who have experience with R beforehand, or if you just have to be familiar with the program. Because like I mentioned in my last podcast, the only introduction I had to R was in a summer research program I did last summer. And that was like a 3-week crash course on some really complicated gene expression plots that I had to make. And that's not even closely related to what I'm doing now. So needless to say, I am still struggling. We went over confidence intervals, and the concept itself, I think, makes sense to me. But statistics uses so many letters, you guys. I'm telling you, there's a letter for every variable, and variables could be X's or Y's. But then you throw in this stuff called Y bar or X hat. And when you start throwing Greek letters in the mix, like alpha and beta, you lose me. So there was a lot of that within the first day of my stats class this week. I don't know if you've picked up on this trend or not, but the 2 most challenging classes I have are my stats class and my advanced nutrition class. So stats, I'm floundering. I think I'm doing a little bit better in advanced nutrition. I can't remember if I talked about this in the last podcast or not. Probably not, because it just happened on Monday. So we get into lecture for advanced nutrition, and we're like balls deep in glycogen synthesis and glycogen breakdown. So for those of you who don't know, it's glycogenesis for making glycogen and glycogenolysis for breaking it down. And instead of going over one pathway for glycogen synthesis, making it, and the hormones and the different, conditions in which this would happen, my professor is trying to talk about both of them together at the same time. And biologically or physiologically, that makes sense because they are happening pretty much simultaneously. It definitely depends on the state that you're in. whether you've eaten a meal or if you're exercising, the hormones that influence these pathways change depending on the state that you're in, i.e., fasting or, exercising or eating. And I literally just said, i.e., verbally instead of, for example. Oh man, I'm like visualizing my PowerPoint slides as I'm talking to you about this. So that's kind of why. If this feels PowerPointy, that's why. But instead of talking about the pathways individually, my professor is doing his best to simplify the process and talk to us about both things happening at the same time, because that is physiologically what's happening in your body. They do oppose each other. So the hormones that would influence your body to make glycogen are opposing for the hormones that influence your body breaking it down, which big picture makes sense. But when you're getting into the nitty gritty of the pathways and you're talking about enzymes and you're talking about the local factors that influence the shape of these enzymes, it's not helpful to do both at the same time. And there was one point in class where I felt like I understood exactly what my professor was talking about. I'm like, yeah, insulin, it influences the making of glycogen. And one of the ways that my professor is teaching us this concept, or all of the concepts in the class, is to present the information in different ways. And this is to tailor the experience for people who learn differently, which I totally respect. But I latched on to this one figure that I thought was the best description of what the heck was going on in this glycogen synthesis pathway. And then he flipped to the next slide and I got lost again. It just completely left my brain. And that happened for glycogenesis. And it happened again for glycogenolysis. And I got lost in the sea of lysises. If you don't know about making glycogen or energy metabolism, I'm sorry, because I'm also using a lot of technical terms right now. But if you have heard of these pathways, you understand that they're pretty complicated, but that the hormones often oppose each other when you're talking about energy metabolism. And we haven't even gotten to energy metabolism. We were literally just talking about the storage and breakdown of glucose in your liver and also in your muscle. So I didn't know what the heck was going on after class. I got my hormones mixed up. I didn't know what enzymes were doing what. And at the end of class, like I would say the last 20 minutes of class, he starts talking about kinases. And the only thing that I need to tell you about kinases is that there's literally like 20 of them in glycogen synthesis and glycogen breakdown. And they're all called this, like pretty much the same name. You have like protein kinase A, you have phosphokinase A, and those are different acronyms because they're technically different kinases. And they're signals that your cells use to, send a signal to your body saying, hey, make more glycogen. I can't just be like, oh yeah, kinases make or break glycogen, because it's not, I have to get more detailed than that, which is why he's going over it. I totally understand. But I got so lost. And I think the hardest part about this class is going to be keeping those kinases in check in my brain. Like, okay, I'm talking about protein kinase A. What is that affected by? So I was feeling really super overwhelmed after that class. And that's the closest I've come to crying this week, was after lecture on Monday for that class. But I had set up a study date with one of the girls in my class, her name's Morgan. Shout out, Morgan. You are amazing. And I love studying with you. I hope we do it all semester. We set up a time to sit in front of a gigantic whiteboard and talk about glycogenesis and glycogenolysis. And we went through each slide because a lot of the information that my professor is presenting is redundant because he's trying to explain things in several different ways so that it makes sense to everyone. And I don't think I've ever had a more productive study session. And if I had, it was probably one time in undergrad with my friend Kate and my other friend April. Shout out to you guys. But that's just the level of detail that we need to have for this advanced nutrition class is so much more than my advanced nutrition and metabolism class that I took in my undergrad, because we have to know the intricacies of these pathways now. It's not just, recognizing what enzymes are important and the molecules that are involved. You have to know like what they do and when also. So anyway, we were sitting in front of a whiteboard for 2 hours and it was so productive. Like, I really do feel like I know the making and breakdown of glycogen. And I was riding this wave of success, right? I'm like, yes, I understand. And then I get to class this morning and my professor jumps right in to the middle of the topic again. And we expanded on these frickin' kinases. We went over them again, and I was sort of hanging on because in my study session, we didn't really get to the kinase cascade. We kind of just like stopped because our brains were melting. So today, when he was talking about kinases, I didn't realize initially that the kinases are involved in both pathways. I know I mentioned that earlier, but they are. And it's complicated because the molecule that activates these kinases is slightly different from one pathway to the other, obviously, because they do different things. One is making and the other is breaking down. So that was a nightmare. And the tricky part about this class is we don't really go back and review. We kind of just like touch on, hey, we talked about this last week or last lecture. Let's move on. Great. Does anyone have any questions? And we started getting into the initial steps of glycolysis, which is energy metabolism. It's using glucose for energy to make energy for your body to use. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Until next week. Next week's podcast, we'll talk about glycolysis probably. I did get this really great resource from Morgan, these videos from this guy. I actually have it on my computer. He is called The Ninja Nerd. And he has videos on so many of these. Oh my God. I haven't been recording my video this entire time. Oh, that sucks. Okay, quick intermission. I forgot to start my video before I started talking, which makes sense because it's a podcast, but like if you're watching me on YouTube and you want to watch me talk, the first 15 minutes of this video are literally me talking in the dark because I was not filming. So welcome back. I was on a rampage about glycolysis and I told you guys I wasn't going to talk about it. So we're going to leave that to rest until next week. But I was talking about my friend Morgan giving me this resource called the Nerd Ninja on YouTube. And he has videos on all of the different pathways, including glycolysis and glycogenolysis and glycogenesis. So I'm really excited to keep myself busy this weekend studying with these videos. And I'll actually leave the link down below if you guys were completely lost and you actually want to know what the heck I'm talking about. Because you and I would both like to know. Maybe not. But okay, so that was Monday, and I already talked about stats, which was on Tuesday. And the beginning of my weeks are pretty chill. I only have one class on Monday and one class on Tuesday. Typically, I would have lab meeting, but this week, my mentor was out of office, so we didn't have lab meeting, which was cool. And I have my meeting with her coming up on Friday, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm going over this document called an individual development plan. So she is the second mentor that has done an IDP with me. And I actually really like them. And I guess this is an opportunity to talk about, the structure of a program and interacting with a mentor. So my mentor is a newer professor at Colorado State. And this program specifically was one of those programs where I had to apply directly with a mentor. Like I needed a letter of support, or some colleges call it a letter of endorsement, meaning that the professor agrees that they have funding to support you as a student and that they want you in their lab. And this usually requires you to reach out to them early before the application deadline, have a meeting with them, and talk about your research interests, your experience. I sent my CV to several professors that did these programs. I don't think they're technically called like closed programs, but the difference is you have what I did, which is you apply directly to a mentor, or you have like an open application, meaning that you apply to the department instead of a single mentor. And typically in those programs, you do rotations your first year as a grad student. And what that means is that you're rotating into different labs to see which one you'd like to make your home for the next 5 years. And I don't know exactly what the process is for master's students because that is really dependent on your program. Like for San Diego State, they're a really research-focused institution. Colorado State also has a lot of research focus in their programs. So what I'm noticing is the master's programs at CSU, these master's students at CSU are applying to the program, they get in, and then they start to build a relationship with professors and see who's accepting new students. I think that might be the case for a lot of programs just because the time limit or the time frame is shorter. So I applied directly to my mentor for CSU, and I really like that. I think that applying to, a department first and then doing your rotations, there's pros and cons to both. I mean, if you really like the school that you're applying to and they have that like open application where you apply directly to the program and not the professor, it makes more sense because maybe you don't know what your interests are in research. Maybe you like the structure of their academic route for your major, meaning the classes that you're taking. Or maybe you don't care much about that. Maybe you really like the connection that you'd make with a mentor, which is why I chose to do a direct with a mentor program. And at the end of the day, when I had to choose between the different programs, all of the ones in my top 3 were like direct to mentor and not with the department. And I haven't talked about my journey to choosing a grad school because I just haven't sat down to film it. So maybe this is inspiration for my next podcast. So let me know in the comments if you guys want to hear about my journey to choosing a grad school. I did post a series of that on my Instagram at theleafylentil. But if you don't follow me on Instagram or you don't want to go back into the archives that far, I will publish a podcast because I do think that it's important to talk about. And I love sharing my process with everyone because the more information you have, the more well-rounded of a decision that you can make. And I asked a ton of questions when I was applying to grad school. And that actually brings me back to this IDP, which was the point. I don't even know how I got off on that tangent about like mentors and applying to a program with a mentor versus applying to the department. But anyway, I think where I was going with that is an IDP is basically a written way for you to articulate your personal and professional goals. And it gives your mentor a guideline for keeping you in check with those goals. Because ultimately, the IDP is a tool for you as the grad student to use to maybe voice some goals that you didn't know you had. And I really like the emphasis between, personal and professional development because I want to have a life outside of grad school and research. One of my biggest reasons for choosing the lab that I chose was because I had a great sense of work-life balance, not only in the department at CSU, but also with my mentor and the people who are currently in her lab, which now includes me. I didn't feel that vibe from a lot of the other places that I applied for. So this IDP has a goal setting for your personal goals and how you're going to achieve them, which I think is really important because you can say that you have a goal all day long, but until you flesh out an action plan, you're not really going to make any progress on that goal. It's just like a pipe dream that you have on your wall or something. But unless you start putting into action these steps to get there, you won't reach it. Or maybe you will, but it'll take longer. So there's a section for that with personal goals and for professional goals. And what's unique about the IDP that I have with my mentor at CSU is she actually has a section built in for how you're going to expand your network of people to also help you achieve those goals. And I think she has a section in there that highlights potential leadership opportunities that you're going to take advantage of. I mean, like joining the student board of a professional organization like, ASN or IFT or FENCI or even the Academy of Nutrition. They have different subsections, like words are fleeting today. Sub chapters of their, Academy of Dietetics. You can have the California Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which was something that I was part of when I was an undergrad. But they have these different chapters depending on the region and the state that you live in. So my mentor has a section on professional networking and, hobbies that you're going to do outside of school. And if you have a goal with those hobbies, what it is and how you expect to get there. And she has timelines for all of this stuff. She asks you to let her know what your timelines are. And I think the most important portion of this IDP, beyond the how are you going to keep your work-life balance section, is the research. Because ultimately, that's why I am there, is to do research on my project. And luckily, because I applied directly with her, she wrote a grant and needed a grad student on a specific project that she is interested in. And I'm interested in everything. So picking a project wasn't really going to be a problem because I literally didn't have a preference. And so I think she told me in one of our very early conversations that the expertise that I hold from my undergraduate research And from what I shared with her on my portfolio website that I built when I was in the SDSU dietetics program, she saw that there were a lot of alignments there with gaps that she needed to fill in her lab and the skills that I brought to the table that she felt her lab needed. And I feel really grateful to be in that position where someone values my skills in the same way that I value their experiences and their knowledge, and the fact that they're willing to, work with me on it. So these research goals in this IDP, they are SMART goals, right? They're specific, they're measurable, they are achievable. Editing Chelsea here. I didn't know how to spell SMART when I did the initial recording of this video, and I forgot the R in SMART goals. It's relevant. So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and now I'm going to talk about time bound. And they're time specific because, a lot of grants that you would apply for are time sensitive anyway. Like if you apply for a grant, they'll guarantee you a couple of years of funding. And so for my grant specifically, they are offering 3 years of full funding. And the idea is that that time frame is long enough for me to complete my aim. And the other 2 grad students that are with collaborators on this project will also meet their aims within that time frame, and we'll all be good to go. So it's funny that I was given this IDP by my mentor a couple of days before I had my ethics and research class, because the first assignment for the ethics and research class is completing an IDP with your mentor. So Friday's meeting is going to be going over that IDP. Also, sorry if you can hear some loud noise. My husband is opening the garage right now and it's very loud. But anyway, so things that I have coming up for the rest of week 4 include attending my second session of ethics and research class. And I really do believe in the content being so valuable, especially because of all of the unethical things that have happened in research and history. And the purpose for this class is to inform us of those wrongdoings or miscommunications or, wrongly reported data, and explain why it might be wrong, and then have us reflect on if we've ever experienced things like that. And it's really opening up some hard conversations that is not part of the societal norms in research right now. I think it's getting better, but I'm really excited for that class. And then I have another session of statistics, and I'm actually hoping to make some progress on my homework before that class, because going to the class is that opportunity to talk to my professor. And now that I'm thinking about it, I forgot to email him to ask for a time to meet. So thanks for this podcast for reminding me. And then Friday, I don't have any classes, which I mentioned in my last podcast is amazing. And it's my day to, go down whatever spiral I'm in that week and recover. But I do think that this Friday is going to be dedicated to meeting with my mentor and doing my stats homework. And we'll see if any other tasks come out of my meeting. But this weekend, I am just teaching yoga and doing homework. And I think there's a departmental picnic that I'm going to at some point this weekend. And I'm excited because it's my first time mingling with all the people in the department all in one space. So I'll give you guys an update on how that went. See, there's so much fun happening at the same time that there's so much stress, and it's really confusing. But I didn't get an opportunity to end my last podcast with some questions from my viewers. And today I actually have 2 questions. and I am going to answer them now. And I'm planning on doing a Q&A answer session at the end of every podcast. So please put your questions down in the comments if you have any, because it really does help me stay on track, and it'll give me more topics to cover as this podcast matures. So the first question that I was asked is what I'm enjoying most about grad school so far. And if you had asked me this my first week, I probably would have just said getting to meet and get to know my colleagues in the department. But after spending several weeks with them so far, I'm really enjoying the process of learning from my peers and getting to see their faces all the time and listen to them talk about their projects. It's all coming from such a passionate place, and they speak with such confidence, and it gives me something to look up to look forward to, and to aspire to be when I'm, in my second, third, fourth, and fifth year, or whatever, of my program. So honestly, learning from them has been really fun. And I really took advantage of them today with their, offer of their knowledge with my really intense immunology presentation. And I actually cannot believe I forgot to talk about this because it literally just happened today. So I'm going to pause the Q&A and jump into literally the most stressful thing that happened this week. I think I blocked it out. It was one of those things where I was stressed up to it, and then it happened, and now I'm leaving it in the dust. It's just in the back of my brain now. But anyway, so I had to give a presentation in my Pillars of Immunology Journal Club class on this molecule called the major histocompatibility complex. And my background in immunology is zero. I knew a couple of names of genes from the project that I did with irritable bowel syndrome last year in the summertime, and that is it. I think I remembered 2 genes from that entire project. So jumping into these really technical papers from the 1970s, because they are basically the foundation for immunology research that's come in the years after that, it's both really cool and really hard to understand. So I was assigned these 2 papers written by and published by these 2 gentlemen that got their Nobel Prize from doing this project on MHC restriction. So my job this week was to present these 2 papers published by 2 people who laid the foundation for MHC restriction. And I'm not going to get into this because I don't understand it. I know more today than I did last week about this, I will say. I went down a giant rabbit hole yesterday trying to understand the foundation of MHC molecules and how they work. And I think that showed in my presentation because I really did have a foundational knowledge of the different types of these molecules that exist in our bodies. And when it came to describing each figure from the paper, I didn't know all of the intricacies of, genes and alleles and the different mice strains that exist for research like this. And so I kind of got lost in a sea of acronyms. But what was cool about this class is the facilitator invites these speakers that are subject matter experts in the field within the topic that we're discussing, which today was MHC. And so I actually got to lean on him, and I explained what I thought the tables were saying, and then he came back with me afterwards and talked about the why and the how behind a lot of these findings that were in the paper. And so it was a really cool experience. I didn't completely put my foot in my mouth. And I'd say it went pretty well. I didn't cry. And like I said in my last podcast, that has been the metric for progress is, did I cry? And I'm happy. So anyway, back into the Q&A. So the second question has absolutely nothing to do with research or PhDs of any kind. And I'm so grateful. My friend Grace asked me to talk about my coffee drinking and the excitement that's generated about making delicious lattes at home because I bought my own espresso machine and what I'm hoping to achieve with this new skill. First of all, I am very excited that I am a proud owner of a Breville espresso machine. It's allowing me the freedom to explore coffee in a different way. And it's been really exciting because I get to ask people at coffee shops now when I order my latte, like what their favorite part about it is, or more specifically at my favorite coffee shop in Fort Collins, I made friends with the managing barista and him and I were talking about the gram amount that should go in a portafilter. And we were completely nerding out. Even though I don't know a lot about coffee, I love drinking it and I love the taste of it. And I love the versatility in transferring the espresso shot into whatever flavor latte you want. And I'm starting to understand it, I think. I pulled a shot a couple of days ago and it actually turned out really well. It was the best latte I made at home, even though my latte, art was non-existent and the actual steaming of the milk was horrible, in my opinion. But anyway, I think given that I started from zero, that latte that I made in my kitchen was an 8.7 out of 10. And it was very enjoyable to drink. I'm not really sure what I'm hoping to achieve with this new skill. Maybe just a hobby that doesn't have anything to do with exercising, and it gives my brain a break from research and classes. Because honestly, weighing coffee grounds in a portafilter and watching a pressure gauge on my espresso machine is a lot less mentally labor intensive than doing my stats homework. And it's a lot less physically demanding than going to the gym and pulling or pushing weights around. So I'm just looking forward to expanding this a little bit more artistic side that I haven't really tapped into before. And I think it'll be really fun. So if you are listening and you are a coffee pro and you have any tips for me, whether it's pulling a good shot or your favorite beans that you like to put in your espresso machine, or any videos that you've seen on how to make latte art that you think are really easy to follow, let me know. And thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I'm sorry that the video started only halfway through if you're actually watching this on YouTube. And if you're just listening, I'm happy to have your ear. I think this podcast thing is going to be a really fun way for me to talk about my experiences and to remind myself to stay positive and to work through it the way that I know or will know how to do. Because it forces me to get out of my head and speak what I'm thinking. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, or you can message me on Instagram. And in the meantime, I'll be sharing my coffee adventures on Instagram. And I will talk to you next week. See you soon.